So I'm getting tired of just commenting. I wanted to make a video because we're bringing up so many different things, and I think half of the people reading the comments are confused about who's responding to who and what's even going on. So let's try to clear this up and slow down and see what we're really trying to do here. The modern mystic brought up Richard Dawkins and the selfish gene hypothesis or theory. I don't know if they've actually, they've tested it, I think, so I guess it's a theory. But they've also tested notions of social evolution and evolution of the group or the species, and of that higher level evolutionary force playing just as much a role as the lower level genetic force that Dawkins wants to say is all that really matters. So even just scientifically, within the field of empirical scientific research and experiment itself, Dawkins' selfish gene theory is by no means the only possibility, and it's not, it doesn't provide us with a coherent cosmological perspective. So to offer that as some new kind of religion or purpose or reason for being, I don't think that works, because it's just too narrow of a data set. It's evolutionary biology, and not only that, but one specific approach to evolutionary biology. So, it's not the whole picture, and we can't just rely on the selfish gene theory to answer all of our questions about the nature of life and the purpose of life. Mort brought up systems theory, and what systems theory wants to do is it says, look, we have all these different, I'm just generalizing here, which is what systems theory is all about. You can get specific with it, but there are some system theorists. Ken Wilber is one of the most popular ones, but he's kind of the pop version of systems theory, so it's kind of a very overgeneralized thing. Gene Gebser was trying to do this, the same type of a systematic analysis of every data set of human experience that we have collected so far. I'll put it that way. And by data set, I mean, we have all of these psychologists who have studied the human psyche, the nature of interior human experience, and our relationship to archetypes and dreams and altered states of consciousness. There's a whole body of work that's been devoted to that since at least Freud. Nietzsche got it started. Kant was the first one to say, like, look, there is this internal psychological structuring of the outside empirical world that's a priori, and we can't assume that everything comes from sense data, or that everything is defined and literally described by the motion of matter through space. That's materialism. That's the idea that only what we see and hold in our hands is real. But that just negates the one that feels, the one that sees. And, of course it sounds like I'm just being a dualist, but that's the position that I'm forced to take to counter materialism. I have to take, Henry Bergson's vitalism. I have to take that position. If I have a biologist like Richard Dawkins, I have to become the opposite extreme and say that there's some kind of internal spirit that's spontaneously creating the organism from the inside out, because that's the only way we can explain how light and energy at the beginning becomes life and mind and intelligence and technology and culture at the end. The input and the output through the course of evolutionary time, to me, just seems more complex than we can just say the random conglomeration of forces somehow accidentally produced the results that we see today. It seems to me that there is some kind of a teleological or teleonomic process going on within evolution itself that drives it towards more complexity, more interconnectedness, higher levels of expression. Why wouldn't the whole thing just remain as energy? It could have survived indefinitely in that state. But for some reason, it took the you would say, if you were going to see this in the behind the lens of the selfish gene, even though there's no genes in the material world, just the general, if we were to extend Dawkins' selfish gene idea to a cosmology and say that every separately existing entity in the universe is out for itself, then why would energy ever become matter? That's not an evolutionarily advantageous state to become, because matter is a lot more vulnerable than pure light. Pure light is so fast and so fierce, and nothing can. It is time. It is space. It is everywhere at once. But it becomes matter. It solidifies itself, not concretizes itself, and then matter becomes even more fragile by making stars and planets and life. Why become life? Why become alive and put yourself through all of that suffering when you could have just remained totally blind? Matter is obviously totally blind, right? Or at least, I mentioned Whitehead, and I don't know how many, he wasn't a particularly popular philosopher, I guess. He wrote the Principles of Mathematics with Bertrand Russell, which was subsequently sort of overturned or put in its place by Gödel's theorem of the self-referencing symbols, that you can never fully define a system, and that there will always be different axiomatic systems that are equally true but contradict one another. And so we can never be totally outside the system, basically. And that's really what Hofstadter's books are about, I think, except he doesn't take it that one final step to his own idea. He still has the idea, like Dawkins has the idea, that he can be a scientist in the sense that Descartes and Bacon defined the scientist as the totally objective outside observer with a view from nowhere. See, we've privileged what's really the intellect's ability to understand and map the world using language and mathematics. We've so privileged that particular faculty of the human experience that we think it's actually out there in the world, and that we experience it first through some sensory impression, when really we're projecting a framework around the sensory impression and interpreting the sensory impression through that framework, through that lens. And I think what relativity theory shows us, that everything, first of all, is energy, and that all time and space exists now. All time exists now, and it's not traveling in a straight line into the future. That's why the whole idea that the human race could ever make progress is kind of, it doesn't even make sense anymore to say that. It feels good to say it, but it doesn't make sense anymore to say that. There's no logical reason to say it. There's no mathematical, physical reason to say it. The observations that we have made about the universe, not only empirically with sensory data, but mentally with a type of mathematical empiricism, I guess you would say. We've understood the laws or the habits behind the phenomenon. And then quantum theory, of course, shows that the subject and the object are just, irreversibly entwined, and we're never gonna be able to escape that relationship with the world. And that's why Whitehead's important, because his whole cosmology was based on the idea that the fundamental unit of existence is not the gene, it's not the molecule, it's not the atom, it's experience. Because if everything is related, all that could ever happen in the universe is an experience, a relationship between two things. There's never a human being thinking or living outside of this world. There's no such thing as a human being. There is a human being world relationship. There's an organism environment field. There's never such thing as an organism with a selfish genetic program forcing it to progress somehow through nature. See, there's a relationship, a gestalt, and we can never assign the causative value to one side or the other. So purpose, that's why purpose is playful. You can't assign it to any particular side.